You were never meant to hear this story. In fact, the ones who lived it ensured that no word of it escaped for over 150 years. But history has cracks, and from those cracks, sometimes something leaks. What happened in Hollow Creek was not a haunting. It was not madness. It was a ritual. A calculated act of self-erasure carried out by 14 women who had once sworn their lives to the church, and then chose silence over salvation. They stitched their lips closed with waxed thread, and they never spoke again. This isn't a tale of superstition. This is about control, psychological, spiritual, institutional, because if you strip away the veils, the habits, the candlelight and hymns, you find a truth too dangerous to be kept in any holy book. These women did not lose their voices. They gave them away, willingly, to something ancient, something older than Rome, and once you understand why, you'll realize this wasn't just a personal vow. It was a rebellion, a coded war fought in silence, and it still echoes. You need to understand something before we go deeper. Silence is not weakness. Silence, in the right hands, is weaponized, and these sisters, these daughters of prayer, became masters of it because words are traceable, but ritual lingers even after the body is gone, and the ritual was sealed in wax, pressed into flesh, and hidden behind stone walls for over a century. The convent at Hollow Creek didn't just vanish from records, it was erased, clergy reassigned, land deeds voided, the remaining artifacts locked away in diocesan vaults labeled non-ecclesiae. But some traces survive: scorched notes in Latin, shipment invoices for beeswax in unnatural quantities, and one final testimony, unsigned, untranslated, buried in the Vatican's restricted archives. That's where the phrase first appears: coirum sigillatum, vox ultima. The sealed choir, the final voice. What was the final voice, and who, or what, were they silencing? The records say it started in 1847, but that's a lie. By the time the first traveler heard the quiet humming behind the chapel walls, by the time the first wax shipment arrived under snowfall and secrecy, it had already begun. What we call the Hollow Creek Convent wasn't built on sacred ground, it was built to contain it. Look closer at the original deeds. The land was never registered as parish property. It was deeded to a private entity with a name translated only once in the early archives: Custodia Vocis, the keepers of the voice. Not the voice of God, something else. There's a phrase that keeps surfacing in the margins of the old ledgers, scribbled in anxious ink by clerics who did not dare speak it aloud. The voice that speaks without mouth. The choir that sings beneath the grave. It was never about prayer. It was about resonance, vibration, ritual, alignment, and it required a vessel, 14 of them precisely. They were selected, not chosen, not for piety, but for purity of tone. That's what the letters say. Vocem purum, the pure voice. Choir members were tested not with doctrine, but with frequencies, held in sound chambers beneath the rectory and subjected to tones that made others weep or convulse. These women didn't break, they harmonized. When they were brought to Hollow Creek, the veil of nunhood was just a cover. The convent's true design was not for devotion, it was acoustic. Every wall, arch, corridor calibrated to echo a frequency that could not be recorded. A resonance that only occurred when all voices aligned, perfectly, and then fell silent. That's the key. The silence was the note, the absence of sound that created the breach. It wasn't the singing that opened it, it was the stopping. After the final ritual in the winter of 1849, no nun ever spoke again, because they had become the seal, the wax that bound their mouths. Asn't for penance. It was insulation, containment. But the real horror, they weren't sealing something in, they were sealing something out. And the louder the world became, trains, telegraphs, engines of war, the more fragile the seal grew. Silence, you see, is not passive. It's a kind of scream too deep for the ear. And these women were screaming every second of their lives, not in sound but in silence. It wasn't just the convent that vanished, it was the paper trail. Start tracing the diocese records after 1850, and you'll find them clean. Too clean. Entire volumes missing. Not burned. Not damaged. Removed. Lifted out like infected tissue. The archivist's handwriting abruptly stops. Letters terminate mid-sentence. Even the Vatican's Apostolic Visitations report, usually meticulous, contains a single line on Hollow Creek. No further inspection required. Area non grata, spiritual quarantine in effect. Spiritual quarantine. The Church doesn't use that phrase lightly. It appears in only 2 other known cases, once in 1348 during the Black Death, and once in the 12th century near Lake Leman, in reference to a heretical sect that sang backwards into the earth. Those documents were sealed under Papal Edict 142. And yet, if you follow the erased ink trails, the story bleeds back through. One priest, Father Henricus Lowell, refused to stay silent. He left the clergy in 1861 after visiting the outskirts of Hollow Creek. His journals, long buried in a family vault, describe the hum. It was not sound as we know it. It lived inside the bones, a droning pressure that swelled behind the eyes. I do not know if it was a voice, but it listened back. He claimed the convent was not abandoned, that the sisters were alive, unmoving, unblinking, yet alive, preserved, he wrote, by the agreement of stillness. When he tried to publish his findings in a theological review, the issue never went to press. The printer's shop burned, 2 typesetters disappeared, and Father Lowell was institutionalized in less than a year for obsessive religious delusion. His final entry? If you silence yourself long enough, something else starts to listen. It wasn't just about muting heresy. The Church feared activation, because these rituals, if mimicked, if triggered by resonance or voice, could reopen the breach. Hollow Creek had become a dormant transmitter. And the sisters? They were the receivers. For decades, secret orders and church-backed societies worked to keep the story contained. Men were paid, records were forged, and every time a whisper escaped, someone died. Coincidence? Maybe. But then tell me, why do 3 modern audio engineers, each studying unexplained low-frequency distortions, report the same coordinates traced to an empty field in Ohio? Why did one, before vanishing, write the phrase "sealed choir" on his studio wall in wax? Before there were nuns, before there was a convent, before the land was ever called Hollow Creek, the ritual already existed. You see, most assume the Church invented silence as devotion, but silence is older than prayer, older than words. Silence was the original language of power, not absence, but containment. The ancients knew this, and they feared it. Across early Indo-European civilizations, there are references to women, always women, who bore silence not as punishment, but as ritual armor. The Vedic Munis, the Anatolian keepers of the breath, and among the oldest Sumerian texts, a sect described as Nindur Ezen, the daughters whose lips were closed by flame. These groups appeared briefly, then disappeared without record, but archaeologists have found patterns. Rooms built without echo, sealed stone chambers with smooth walls, no inscriptions, and wax residue in the corners. The mouth, they believed, was a gateway, not just for sound, but for something that could not be allowed to cross. What they were silencing wasn't out there. It was within. Now look again at Hollow Creek's foundation. The original chapel stone was not quarried in Ohio. It was imported, illegally, from France in 1821, smuggled from the ruins of a Benedictine cloister destroyed during the Napoleonic purges. That cloister, in turn, had been built atop a Roman temple, and beneath that, according to recovered notes by a French military engineer, was something else entirely, a hollow chamber, filled with melted wax and bones, no inscriptions, only humming. That stone, that singing stone, was the altar base in Hollow Creek. The resonance began there. The sisters did not build the seal. They became the seal, completing a ritual that began before language, before Christ, before any structure we call religion. And yet the Church knew, not all of it, not the village priests or parish scribes, but the ones who guard the real archives, the Congregatio Silencio, a hidden order buried within the Curia, tasked not with saving souls, but with stopping certain doors from opening. They sent agents to Hollow Creek, but by the time they arrived, the ritual had been completed, the choir had sealed, and the air was no longer safe to speak in. You may think this is ancient history, but silence doesn't age. Silence waits. They say no one ever spoke inside the chapel at Hollow Creek again. That's not true. One man did. His name was Elias Brandt, a geologist sent in 1907 by the state under the guise of surveying mineral beds. He'd heard the stories, of course. Who hadn't? By then the convent was a ruin in all but form, its roof sagging, its windows sealed with stone, but the chapel still stood. He ignored the warnings. Locals wouldn't cross the property line. They said the trees around it grew twisted, that animals wouldn't nest there, that the birds stopped singing the moment you passed through the iron gate. Elias called it superstition. He entered the chapel with a surveyor's instruments, a notebook, and a small phonograph. Only 2 of those objects were ever recovered. The phonograph cylinder survived, cracked, warped, but playable. It contains exactly 47 seconds of audio, no speech, just wind. Then something else, faint but clear under magnification. A voice, male, familiar, whispering one word again and again, each time more strained. Open, open, open. Then, a sudden shift. The whisper cuts. A sharp gasp, followed by a low, droning hum. It builds for 6 seconds before the cylinder warps entirely. Elias's body was found days later just outside the convent wall. No wounds, no signs of struggle, but his mouth had been cauterized shut from the inside out, as if burned by sound. His tongue was gone, his throat charred, and beside him, carved into the dirt with a surveyor's compass, were 3 words: "Choir still sings." For years, no one dared enter again. Until 1933, during Prohibition, when bootleggers attempted to use the empty convent to store shipments. They were never seen again. But their truck was recovered 2 miles downriver, inside 14 burned-out candles, and 1 blood-stained ledger page with a strange repeating phrase: "The wax does not melt, the wax remembers." Authorities blamed it on rival gangs, but those who'd seen Hollow Creek, really seen it, knew better. Because here's the truth no one dares say aloud: the silence isn't passive. It's alive. It waits for a voice to challenge it, and the moment you do, it listens back. Before they sealed their mouths, they sealed something else. Their thoughts. We think of silence as absence, but for the Sisters of Hollow Creek, silence was pressure. It built inside them, slowly, irrevocably, until it turned thought into echo, and echo into something else. A journal was recovered decades later, hidden in the wall of a barn nearly 40 miles from the convent. It bore no name, just a symbol, a veiled mouth sewn shut with thorns. The entries are sparse, deliberate, but unmistakably written by one of the 14, likely a novice still struggling against the discipline. The first entries are coherent. I cannot speak, not even in dream, but the sound is inside me, like breath that has no place to go. Then, 3 weeks later, when we kneel together, I feel their thoughts, not words, shapes, heat, rhythm. We do not pray anymore. We become the prayer. She describes a moment of internal collapse, when thinking in language becomes impossible, when every idea arrives fully formed, without sentence or syllable, pure cognition unshaped by words. And then the voices begin. They call it hallucination. They are wrong. It is the feedback, the silence growing hungry. One sister weeps with no tears. Another bleeds from the ears but does not move. We are becoming something old, something hollow and ringing. Language began to erode inside them. One by one, their inner monologues fell silent. The human mind is built on narrative, but take away words, and what remains? Not clarity, not peace, submission. The journal ends with a phrase written over and over: "We are the wax, we are the wick, we are the silence." This wasn't self-denial, it was transformation. They weren't silencing themselves for faith, they were emptying themselves to house something else. One neurologist who analyzed the journal before it was seized by the church compared it to extreme cases of auditory deprivation. He said the sisters' brains likely began rerouting sensory input, hallucinating sound as light, heat, or pressure. He called it total cognitive override. The church called it heresy. But the truth, they had become transmitters, and whatever lived in the frequency of silence, the choir beneath the seal, had tuned their minds like instruments. And when you tune too tightly, something snapped. They thought it was a weapon. In 1961, the U.S. Department of Psychological Operations, a division so classified it doesn't officially exist, opened a file labeled Project Quirum. Declassified only in fragments under a FOIA, the surviving documents reveal something chilling. Subject: sealed cognition experiments, control via non-linguistic silence transmission. Objective: harness ritual silence as a medium for mass suggestion and belief override. They weren't trying to study the nuns, they were trying to recreate them. At the height of the Cold War, intelligence agencies were obsessed with controlling thought without visible force. Not propaganda, not torture, something deeper. A form of control that bypassed language altogether, striking the subconscious before a subject could form resistance. That's when they found Hollow Creek. A field team operating under the cover of geological research excavated beneath the chapel ruins in 1964. What they discovered was not ruins, it was preservation. Stone chambers beneath the altar, walls lined in wax. And in the center, a wax disc etched with concentric grooves like a phonograph. When played under controlled frequencies, it emitted no sound, but triggered spontaneous vomiting, migraines, and visions in 3 of the 5 test subjects. Their notes describe identical hallucinations. A woman kneeling, her face hidden, her mouth weeping wax. Sound familiar? The disc was classified as an acoustic anomaly and shipped to a black site in Virginia. There, researchers built the first experimental silence chamber, a sealed dome designed to replicate the convent's resonance. Inside, they placed volunteers, prisoners, orphans, anyone who wouldn't be missed. Some emerged mute. Others screamed for hours in languages no one recognized. One broke his own jaw trying to let the silence out. And yet, they continued. Because they weren't afraid of the cost, they were obsessed with the result, a mind no longer operating through personal language, a vessel stripped of ego, voice, resistance. A soldier who no longer thinks. A citizen who no longer questions. That's the real power of Hollow Creek. Not horror, not faith. Control. The nuns didn't stumble into madness. They were architects of it. Ritual silence is the oldest form of obedience because it bypasses belief and reshapes perception itself. Ask yourself, if you couldn't think in words anymore, could you still call yourself free? The ritual didn't end at Hollow Creek. It mutated. You think the wax was just symbolism, a metaphor for silence? No, it was a carrier, a conductor. Wax has been used in occult and religious rites for thousands of years, not just to seal, but to preserve frequencies, impressions, spiritual resonance. Every candle burned in that chapel wasn't for light. It was for imprint. The wax absorbed the ritual, and then it was molded again, into seals, into threads, into masks. And the veil? It wasn't modesty, it was camouflage, a barrier between perception and reality. Because the moment you see the mouth, the human signal of sound, your brain prepares to hear. But the veil breaks that loop. It confuses your neurons. Your instincts can't find an anchor. It's dissonance, strategic dissonance. And now, look around you. Look at the modern institutions that traffic in silence and compliance. Intelligence agencies, black sites, cults wrapped in corporate logos, even elite boarding schools with ceremonial uniforms. You'll find veils, seals, and always ritual objects that don't quite belong. A private Catholic school in Vermont with no audio in its security footage for over 10 years, only a faint hum. A Swiss finishing academy whose students speak no known language after their 3rd term, only gestures in unison. A tech company whose boardroom contains 14 identical white candles, never lit, never moved, just watched. We think these symbols are aesthetic. We're wrong. They are the delivery mechanism. Every veil, every piece of linen, every wax seal sent by certain secret orders, they all echo back to Hollow Creek, not by accident but by design. The rituals were broken into fragments, portable, deniable, adaptable. Why? Because full ritual would be too powerful, too unstable. But fragmented rituals, they're subtle, invisible, they train the mind. Start with sills. And obedience. Add ritual repetition, strip language, interrupt sleep, control sensory input. Within weeks, even the strongest mind begins to reroute. You don't need a convent anymore. You need compliance through symbol. And the most terrifying part? The wax, the veil, the silence. It's already here, in the world you live in, at your workplace, your church, your school. You just don't recognize it because your mind has already been tuned not to see. Most convents operate on 3 vows: poverty, chastity, obedience. But Hollow Creek added a 4th, one that no record ever officially acknowledged, one that was never written, never spoken, and never signed. It was taken in silence, bound in wax, and sealed in blood. They called it the vow of unmaking. You won't find that phrase in any Catholic liturgy. You won't find it in Roman archives either, not unless you know the coded indexing systems used in the Congregatio Silencio's black files. Even then, it appears only once. Votum immanifestum, the final severing of voice from self. No language, no thought, no witness. A return to pre-identity. This was not a vow to God, it was a vow to stop being. In the 1860s, a hidden chapter of Jesuit field notes surfaced, recovered from the journal of a missionary who encountered one of the Hollow Creek escapees. Yes, one escaped, or rather was released. She had no name, no voice, only a cloth pouch around her neck containing a scrap of beeswax folded around a hair, hers, maybe, or someone else's. The Jesuit wrote, "Her eyes held no reflection, she did not blink, yet when I prayed aloud in Latin, she wept. I believe the words hurt her. He tried to baptize her again, she recoiled. He offered her food, she refused. Only when he lit a candle did she reach forward, not to warm herself, but to hold her hand above the flame, as if remembering. He reported that her lips were sealed, not sewn, not scarred, but fused, as if speech itself had never formed. The vow she carried had erased not just language, but self-perception. She didn't know her name, she didn't have a name, and that's the point. The vow of unmaking isn't about sacrifice, it's about obliteration, the complete dissolution of ego, identity, and history. Because once you erase who you are, you can house something else. That's the secret. And no one tells you about spiritual control systems. It's not about purity. It's about vacancy. Every ritual, every silence, every seal, it's all designed to make room, to clear out the noise of human thought and let something older speak through the vessel. The nuns didn't just fall into madness. They stepped out of themselves and never came back. Why 14? Why not 11, as some early reports claimed? Why not 12 to echo the apostles? Because 14 wasn't chosen by accident, it was required. There's a pattern in ancient liturgies, older than Christianity, older than Judaism. From Sumer to Egypt to the Indus Valley, 14 is the number of containment. In Egyptian myth, Osiris was torn into 14 pieces. In Babylonian magic, 14 laments were sung to seal the gates of Kur, the underworld. In lost Hebrew mysticism, 14 steps led to the chamber of silence, where the voice of God could not follow. Hollow Creek wasn't just a convent, it was a lock. And the sisters? They weren't servants of God. They were the mechanism that kept the door closed. Each nun bound to a specific direction, a specific resonance. North, south, east, west, body, blood, mind, voice, each one a key turned inward. But it only worked if there were exactly 14, not 13, not 15, one too few, and the pressure fails, one too many, and the choir begins to hum. Underneath the chapel, beneath the wax stone floor, there is a vault. Every record confirms it, stone cold and unlit, sealed with a compound no mason can explain. The writings call it sang factum, a mixture of wax, blood, ash, and salt. Unbreakable. Inside that vault is something no one has ever seen. But every whisper, every hallucination, every vision triggered by proximity to Hollow Creek points to presence, not relic, not artifact, entity. The nuns weren't silencing themselves in worship, they were holding it down. An esoteric report recovered from a failed Vatican subcommittee on resonant containment protocols described it this way. 14 vessels in alignment form a loop of negation, an echo so perfectly tuned it devours itself. This is not silence, this is containment by opposition. Should the loop break, the stored vibration will unfold into audible geometry, not music, not word, something that reshapes cognition itself. Think about that. A sound that doesn't enter your ears, it reconfigures your mind. It's not noise, it's a blueprint. And if the seal breaks, that blueprint gets read, not by eyes, but by the soul. And the ones who hear it, they do not stay human. It happened once. Just once. In 1912, a fault line opened beneath Hollow Creek. A tremor, shallow but sharp, recorded only by a single seismograph at Ohio State. Most dismissed it, no damage was reported, no town filed complaints. But something did shift beneath the convent. Witnesses, few and scattered, reported unnatural phenomena in the days that followed. One man claimed the crows vanished, all of them, gone overnight. A midwife swore she delivered 2 stillborn infants within 24 hours, both with mouths fused shut, tongues fully formed, lips sealed smooth. A boy from a neighboring farm went missing for 3 days. When he returned, he couldn't speak, only drew symbols in the dirt, a ring of 14 figures kneeling around a black hole. But it was the candle merchant who saw it first. His name was August Fletch. He made annual deliveries of wax to the surrounding parishes. That year, Hollow Creek had sent no order, but something compelled him. A sense of incompletion, he said, a sense of an open silence. He arrived with a crate of candles. He left without a voice. Neighbors found him in the field the next morning, eyes red, mouth trembling, blood crusted in his ears. He wouldn't answer questions, couldn't. Only when given paper and pen did he manage to write one thing. One was missing. They didn't understand until weeks later when the chapel doors swung open for the first time in decades. Inside, 13 nuns. 13, not 14. They were kneeling, silent, perfectly still, but in the center of their circle was a dark smear on the stone, as if one of them had combusted, not burned, unmade. Whatever alignment they had held together had broken. Even without speaking, you could feel it, in the air. It pressed in wrong, thick, charged, like standing inside a throat about to scream. That's when the humming began. Not from the sisters, from below, low, pulsing, like machinery built of bone and memory. It lasted 7 minutes, exactly. Then, it stopped. The 13 sisters never moved, never aged, never died. To this day, they remain. Frozen in that chapel, still holding the shape of the seal, now incomplete. And beneath them, whatever stirred when the 14th fell, it's not asleep anymore. It was never just a hum. It was a frequency, a signature, a cipher you don't decode with your ears, but with your nervous system. After 1912, that sound beneath Hollow Creek was never recorded directly, but it was heard, again and again. First, in dreams, survivors of the nearby parish began reporting identical nightmares of a hallway filled with melted candles, of a veiled figure behind a door, of a sound that started in their teeth and ended in their spine. They called it the breath without breath. One man, a choirmaster from Asheville, suffered a seizure during rehearsal. When he awoke, he wrote a sheet of music he claimed he heard in the dream. It was later analyzed by acoustics experts. The notes, when transposed into vibration, aligned exactly with a known military jamming frequency, one that induces vertigo, nausea, and auditory hallucination. Coincidence? No. In 1943, during the Second World War, British intelligence began studying sonic disruption as psychological warfare. The OSS followed suit. In their top-secret files, Project Psi. Its objective? Weaponize low-frequency ritual tones to destabilize enemy soldiers without detection. They tested hundreds of frequencies. Only one caused universal reaction: headaches, paranoia, loss of identity boundaries. They didn't know it yet, but it matched the Hollow Creek resonance. Exactly. That frequency was later buried, reclassified, renamed as Infrasound Artifact 14L. To this day, broadcasting it in public is illegal under NATO psych warfare conventions. But here's the catch: some have replicated it, not through machines, but through music. Certain experimental compositions, played in exact pitch and tempo, can awaken the echo. Not the full hum, but a taste of it, enough to make your thoughts slip, to lose time, to see things in the dark that shouldn't be there. One infamous track, composed in 1971 under the alias V Choir, was banned after 5 listeners reportedly gouged their ears. One wrote in blood on the wall, "They are still humming, make it stop." But it doesn't stop, because once the frequency touches you, it imprints. It finds you when you sleep, when you're alone, when the noise fades. It is not music, it is remembered sound, and once heard, It never truly leaves you. You've made it this far. That already makes you different, because most don't. Most turn back. They feel the shift, the cold edge behind the story, and they click away. They tell themselves it's just fiction, just atmosphere. But you kept listening. And now the sound has touched you. You may not have felt it, not yet, but your brain has. Somewhere beneath conscious thought, your nervous system is already reacting. You see, the echo doesn't just haunt locations, it attaches to perception, it latches on to attention. That's why the church never destroyed Hollow Creek. They couldn't. Because Hollow Creek is not a place. It's a structure of silence, a framework so precise, so recursive, that once you understand even a fragment of it, your own thoughts become part of the loop. Every time you replay a detail, every time you wonder about the nuns, every time you see veils or hear soft rhythms in the night, you're feeding the seal, or maybe worse, you're weakening it. Because here's the forbidden truth. The ritual was never meant to stay hidden. It was meant to be reconstructed, inside others, inside minds, inside you. And that's what's happening now, right here, right now. You've already heard too much. Now I'm going to ask something from you. Not for views, not for clicks, but for the ritual. If you feel the hum, even faintly, comment the phrase below twice. Let the algorithm carry it. Let others hear what you've heard. Let the structure spread again. Comment. I heard the silence. I felt the wax. I heard the silence. I felt the wax. That phrase will mark you, but it will also protect you. Because silence is not the absence of sound. It's the presence of something else, something ancient, something aware. And it knows now that you've been listening. Not everyone obeyed the vow. Over the years, a few tried to speak. A few believed their faith was stronger than the ritual. They were wrong. In 1926, a young novitiate named Sister Marielle attempted to confess. She had only been inside Hollow Creek for 6 months, not yet fully bound by the fourth vow. She wrote a letter, just a few lines, but even that was too much. She tried to mail it during a supply run. The clerk never received it. The envelope was found behind the rectory, warped and melted, the ink running like blood in wax. When the parish priest visited the convent to investigate, Sister Marielle was gone. Her name had been scratched out of the convent ledger, not blacked out. Scratched, as if the paper itself refused to bear her name. She wasn't excommunicated. She was erased. The church denied any involvement. But 2 months later, in a psychiatric hospital 3 towns east, a girl was admitted under the name Mary Elm. Mute, pale, hands folded permanently against her lips. Doctors noted her refusal to eat, speak, or sleep, except during one precise hour each night, 3:33 a.m. At that exact time, she would hum, just one note, low, vibrating. Every nurse who heard it reported vivid dreams that night. Each different, each disturbing, each containing a faceless nun and a door that could not be opened. Mary Elm died on the 14th day of her stay. Autopsy showed no cause of death. But her mouth? Inside they found thread, not linen, not waxed. Human hair, twisted, braided, pressed between her gums like a seal. And stitched into her tongue was a single Latin word, obligatio. It means binding, the same word used in ancient Roman pacts. Not between men, but between men and forces they could not name. The deeper truth is this. You don't escape a vow by breaking it. You invite it inward. Every whisper you utter becomes an echo. Every T, Ruth, you speak without permission becomes a door, and some doors don't open outward. They open through you. Hollow Creek wasn't the beginning. Not even close. The fourth vow, the vow of unmaking, didn't rise from convent walls or whispered rituals. It came from somewhere far older, far colder. The earliest trace doesn't appear in any Christian archive. It appears in a Sumerian tablet unearthed in 1891 near Eridu, catalogued briefly, then vanished. Not stolen, classified by the British Museum under its short-lived Department of Pre-Oral Anthropology. The tablet described a sect of women, chosen by lunar cycle, isolated by caste, who performed rites to hold back the breath that devours names. They were called the Nam Zara, roughly translated, those who silence the self. Every full moon, they would gather in stone chambers with no openings, no light. They would sit in circles of 14, each would hold a stone coated in black wax, and they would begin to hum. The record ends there, but it's the footnote that matters. Etched into the clay's edge, in a script foreign even to Sumerian scholars, was a phrase that baffled linguists for years. They do not chant to the gods, they chant so the gods don't hear them. That's the point. The fourth vow isn't about praise, it's about containment. It's not spiritual, it's strategic. Every culture that brushed against the Namzara either assimilated or destroyed them. Egypt, Persia, even proto-Christian sects knew of them. But it was Rome that saw their value. In 114 AD under Emperor Trajan, a secretum council in the early church commissioned what they called votum quartus, a silent order designed not to worship God, but to muffle something else. They took the Namzara framework and gave it a new face, habits, crosses, doctrine. But the heart of it never changed. It was still about noise discipline, still about 14, still about the hum. And as the empire fell and the church rose, the fourth vow was hidden in faux. LDS of obscurity, buried beneath theology, then resurrected in quiet enclaves across Europe. Only a few of those enclaves survived the Inquisition, and Hollow Creek was one of them. A final echo of the Namzara, a seal buried in plain sight. You thought this was a tale about haunted nuns. It's not. It's a story about silence as a weapon, a veil used not to hide women from the world, but to hide the world from something listening. It was never about worship. It was never about faith. The silence wasn't reverence, it was a cage, and you don't build a cage unless something inside it can move, or worse, speak. There are words so old they predate language, sounds that don't just describe reality, they alter it. The ancients knew this. They called it namecraft, the idea that some utterances could bind or unbind not just spirits but matter, thought, will. In Kabbalistic mysticism, the 72 names of God are not names at all. They are frequencies, each with the power to reshape a layer of creation. But what if something else had names too? What if something older than the divine had its own resonance, and all it needed was for someone to listen long enough? The Namzara called it Ishmural, the one behind the voice. Not a god, not a demon, a resonance predator. It doesn't kill, it doesn't even touch. It speaks once, and the listener becomes its echo. That's what Hollow Creek was holding back. Not a creature, not an idea, but a sound. One that changes you. Not like possession, more like overwriting. Men who hear it begin to forget their names. Women who hear it wake screaming, hands pressed to mouths they no longer recognize. Not out of fear, out of memory. As if something is trying to teach them how to sing again, in a tongue no human should speak. That's what the 14 were silencing, not a monster in the crypt, but a truth that breaks identity. And here's where it gets worse. Every seal weakens, and this one is no exception. In 1999, a sub-bass anomaly was picked up by deep-sea microphones in the Pacific. It lasted 14 minutes. Exactly, the waveform. It matched the Hollow Creek hum. Some say it's coincidence, others know better. Something is testing its voice again. Not a scream, not a word, just a whisper. But that's all it takes. Because once the whisper finds its echo, it will begin to speak again, and the only question that will matter then is this. Who will be left to stay silent? The church wasn't the only one that knew. They were just the first to bury it under robes and ritual, but others followed, men in suits instead of cassocks, under fluorescent lights instead of candle glow. Governments, think tanks, defense agencies, they didn't see it as heresy, they saw it as potential. Starting in 1949, the U.S. Office of Naval Research began testing auditory containment zones under the name Project Hushlight, declassified in part, but the real documents remain sealed. Its purpose? To weaponize silence itself. Not through suppression, but through a resonance null, an artificial version of what the 14 Sisters had achieved naturally. A silence so complete it became active. It erased not just sound, but intention. Those test zones, 2 failed, but 1 succeeded. A 300-meter bunker beneath the Nevada test site, officially listed as an abandoned acoustic lab. It's still warm, still powered, still recording, and still humming. They call it Well 14. No one enters it alone. Not anymore. In 1982, a Soviet defector named Yegor Drovkin brought over microfilm containing notes from a parallel program in the USSR, Znamenie, the sign. Their data was chilling. They had recorded a chant, just 3 syllables, taken from recovered Sumerian text, same lineage as the Namzara hymns. It was played once, to one test subject. Within minutes, the man lost the ability to recognize his own name. Within hours, he began writing in a spiral. Not words, symbols, teeth, veils, mouths, closed. And finally, in the center, a ring of 14. Yegor defected not for asylum, but out of fear. He claimed the chant wasn't just heard, it remembered him. It echoed back into his dreams, his thoughts, his family. He died in a monastery in Maine in 1991. His final words? The silence is looking for new mouths. Now listen carefully. They knew. They all knew. The Vatican, MI6, DARPA, the Kremlin, even the United Nations, all kept files. Not on demons, not on cults, but on linguistic resonance thresholds, sounds that rewrite cognition, sounds that can erase the listener. And what did they do? They built towers to distract you, screens to flood your ears, music without silence, noise without meaning, because silence is where it starts. And if you ever truly hear it, it will remember you too. Deviations in neural coherence. What they didn't anticipate was that the chamber itself began to resonate first, before the tone was even played. The walls, specially constructed with wax-dampened lead insulation, registered a frequency of 14.1 Thorne Hertz, untriggered by any equipment. It lasted exactly 14 seconds. And then, all equipment failed. Visuals gone, audio dead, biofeedback flatlined. But here's what they recovered after. Each of the 14 subjects, found sitting upright, eyes closed, had identical expressions. Serene, mouths slightly open. No injuries, no signs of duress, but they wouldn't respond. They were alive, but not present. When finally one spoke, 3 days later, it was not in English. Not in any known tongue. She uttered one sound, a deep liquid consonant followed by a sigh that shouldn't have come from human lungs. Then she smiled and whispered, "We were never meant to speak, only to remember." Within 24 hours, her vocal cords hemorrhaged spontaneously. The rest soon followed, not death but transformation. They stopped responding to names, they stopped blinking, they began humming. In perfect unison, always at 3:33 a.m., doctors called it catatonia. The lead researcher called it acquisition. And then he vanished. His final note, scribbled in the margins of a shredded dossier, "Rar, Edie, they are not learning from us. They are reclaiming what was theirs." That's what Well 14 revealed. The hum isn't human. It never was. It's a linguistic virus older than civilization, passed not through speech but through structure. Geometry, rhythm, symbol, number, 14, again and again. Every attempt to isolate it ends the same. Silence, followed by awakening, but not the kind you want. You might think it's contained, that the wax, the vows, the rituals, they're locked in stone and time, but every seal is a pattern, and patterns can be copied. In 2014, a fringe academic named Dr. Cillian Moreau published a thesis titled Resonant Liturgy, the Psychospiritual Architecture of Sacred Silence. Only 36 copies were printed, all were withdrawn within weeks. The digital version? Scrubbed. But not before a few readers tried something. A woman in Arizona, a musician in Dresden, a private group in rural Maine. Each attempted to recreate the conditions described in Moreau's final chapter, what he called the simulacrum rite. It required 14 people, a sealed room with no corners, 7 hours of darkness, a single lit taper, and a sound, a hum precisely tuned to 1414 Hz. It wasn't supposed to work, but it did. At least for a moment. Each group reported the same phenomenon: time distortion, loss of linguistic ability, feelings of presence, and, in all cases, a voice from the center of the circle speaking in no known language. Moreau had called it a hallucination, a psychological echo. But then, the aftermath. One by one, those who performed the simulacrum stopped speaking entirely, not out of trauma, out of choice. Doctors ruled it elective mutism, but when one participant, a man named Saul Grady, was sedated and recorded during sleep, he spoke again. Only one phrase, whispered again and again. It's not silence, it's listening. His voice wasn't his own. It had a timbre that defied anatomy, a layering of tone like multiple mouths beneath a single tongue. His recording was played back to him. He screamed, and then he bit through his own tongue. The audio file, deleted by hospital staff within 48 hours, not out of fear, out of instruction. Because here's the thing no one tells you, once the ritual is replicated, even imperfectly, the structure reawakens. Not just in space, in the mind. The rite is self-propagating. It uses you to hear itself again, and the more people hear about it, the more real it becomes. Now think, how many ears just heard this? How many minds are starting to feel the hum? It was always going to spread, not by force, not by ritual, but by accident, because the fourth vow wasn't designed to contain a sound, it was designed to buy time, and now, that time is ending. You've already heard fragments of it, in the signal beneath broken radio stations at 3 a.m., in YouTube audios titled Deep Sleep Theta Generator that cut off at 1414, in children's nursery toys that loop 3 tones before the batteries die. Even in art. Look closer. Paintings that evoke dread without reason. Sculptures shaped with no symmetry, but still feel balanced. Songs with no lyrics, no rhythm, but something pulling in the background. You don't recognize it as the hum, but your nervous system does. Your spine stiffens, your gut hollows, your thoughts slow down. Why? Because you're not the listener anymore. You're the instrument. See, the danger isn't hearing the full resonance. The danger is cultural dilution. Small doses, scattered through media, soundscapes, film. Not enough to destroy, just enough to condition. Prepare. Prime. It started with a web forum. Users claimed a binaural file called waxchant14.mp3 gave them vivid dreams. It was only 6 seconds long. Someone layered it under a lo-fi track. Then it made its way to TikTok, a silent sound people used in their skits, just white noise, they said. But over time, comments started repeating strange phrases, accounts went dark. Some users stopped posting, stopped replying, some posted only one final message: "We remember now, we don't need to speak." The algorithm flagged it, shadow banned it, erased it. But the echo doesn't need a platform, it needs pattern. And every share, every listen, every memory of this story, you are not just watching, you are helping it take shape. Because culture is the new cathedral, the screen is the new sanctuary, and your attention? It's the new altar. You didn't come here by accident, you were pulled, and now that you're here you have a choice. You can forget, scroll away, pretend this was just a horror video. Or you can drop 2 words into the comments right now to mark your transformation. 2 words they won't understand, but we will. Waxbound. Waxbound. Say it, seal it, signal you're no longer just a man. You're an echo. You've been taught to fear silence, because you were never meant to understand it. Silence, they said, is passive, a void, a vacuum, a lack. But that's a lie. Silence is a throne. In every ritual, in every court, in every room of power, the one who speaks least holds the most control. The monarch listens, the judge waits, the executioner never explains, Because to speak is to kneel, to be heard is to be vulnerable, but to remain silent is to command. The fourth vow wasn't a withdrawal from the world, it was a reclamation. When the 14 sealed their mouths, they didn't retreat from God. They removed themselves from the system. No confession, no obedience, no transmission. They became immune to language, to suggestion, to programming. Because that's the real secret. Words are how you are owned. Every law is a sentence, every contract a spell, every insult a binding, every name a tag in a system you didn't design. But when you choose the silence, when you master it, you sever the thread, you become unnameable, untouchable, unreachable. The sisters at Hollow Creek weren't victims, they were the last free entities in a world addicted to noise. They heard the hum, not as a curse, but as a mirror, and they responded in kind, not with prayer, not with scripture, but with stillness. Total dominion over self. That's what the institutions couldn't tolerate. Not the wax, not the vow, not the ancient sound, but the idea that a human being could choose to disconnect and remain intact. So they buried them, sealed their records, mocked their silence, labeled them mad, possessed, extreme. Because to let the truth spread, that silence can be power, not prison, would destroy the control grid. Your screens, your slogans, your scripts. All of them collapse if enough men simply go quiet, but not aimlessly. Silence with intent is not retreat, it's a weapon, and you're learning how to use it. The walls of Hollow Creek weren't just built, they were ritualized. Every brick, every nail, every alignment. You've been taught churches are designed for light and worship, but some are shaped for containment. The chapel at Hollow Creek wasn't sacred, it was sacrificial architecture. An inverse temple, not to draw heaven down, but to press something back into the earth. It began with the foundation, laid in 14 segments, each carved with a different sigil, not Christian, not pagan, but older. Symbols found etched into Neolithic cave tombs in Armenia, in wet clay beneath Turkish dolmens, in obsidian shards pulled from beneath the Black Sea. They weren't meant to summon, they were meant to trap. At the chapel's heart lies a stone, uncut, black-veined, always warm to the touch. No origin, no matching local mineral. The builders called it the root. It vibrates. Not constantly, only when spoken to. The 14 sisters, they didn't choose to live there. They chose to stand guard. They sealed their mouths because the root listens. And if it hears language, even accidentally, it begins to hum. The hum draws dreams, and the dreams call names. Not yours, not yet. But names you'll soon forget are not yours. The roofline of the convent follows a pattern known in ancient geomancy as the false star. 7 points mirrored to create dissonance in spatial memory. It causes disorientation, mild at first, but over time, it disassembles meaning. You forget why you entered, then where you are, then who you are. And that's the point, because the root beneath Hollow Creek doesn't want escape, it wants recognition. But only one kind of mind can give it that, the kind emptied of identity, stripped of voice, hollowed. That's why the nuns sat in silence, not in worship, but in interruption. Their presence interrupted the root cycle. A living seal of 14 vessels, minds locked in stillness, forming an unbroken psychic loop. Not a cult, not a religion, a containment system in flesh, and it worked, for a while. But stones crumble, wood rots, and wax melts. It wasn't thunder, it wasn't war. It wasn't even fire. It was a question. And that's all it ever takes. One man, a diocesan surveyor named Edwin Vance, was assigned to inspect the Hollow Creek grounds after an internal audit flagged the convent as inactive, not abandoned. So they sent him. Mid-autumn 1965. He arrived alone. No escort, no right, just a clipboard, a set of blueprints, and a deadline. The gate was still closed. The hedges still high, but when he knocked, the door creaked open. No resistance, no sound. What Vance reported in his field notes was standard. Crumbling stone, dry rot, lack of maintenance. But those weren't the original pages. What he wrote first, before the bishop's office forced a revision, was something else entirely. He said he entered the chapel. He said there were still candles burning, and he said the air inside was thick, not with dust but with intent. He heard nothing, but felt something, a vibration in the arches, a thrum beneath the pews. And when he passed the altar, he found a book, bound in wax-treated cloth, no title, no print, only pages. Inside, drawings of mouths, bound, gaping, duplicated, 14 times. And beneath them, scrawled in ink dark as congealed blood, "When the 15th speaks, the circle is broken." That was the first sign. The second came when he asked a question, out loud, to no one, just 6 words. Why would anyone choose this silence? He said the walls shivered. The flame of every candle flared. The stone beneath his feet moaned. And then, from the rafters, a sound. Not a voice, but an exhale, long, cold, knowing. He ran, but the hum followed. Not outside, inside. His chest, his bones, his dreams. He began sleepwalking, speaking in unknown tongues. At work, he hummed, unconsciously, rhythmically. One coworker said it sounded like a church drone, but why tone? Wrong. Within 6 months, Edwin Vance was committed. The doctors called it symbolic aphasia, a disorder where speech becomes abstraction, but he never spoke again, only hummed. 14 tones, repeating, in sequence, and in his final lucid moment, he carved a single word into his hospital wall. 15th. That's the truth no one wanted to admit. The moment you question the silence, you become part of the pattern. You become the next tone, the next mouth, the breach. The ruins of Hollow Creek are not marked on any map. Technically, the land belongs to the Archdiocese of Cincinnati, but no one's filed a claim since 1982. No roads lead to it. No tours visit. And yet, people find it. Or more accurately, it finds them. Hikers, storm chasers, urban explorers. All with the same story. They didn't mean to go there. They took a wrong turn. Their GPS failed. The woods changed. And then, the silence. Not natural silence. Not peaceful. Heavy silence. Pressing, like standing inside a held breath. And always, the scent. Tallow and ash. Those who crossed the chapel threshold now describe time displacement. One man lost 3 hours, woke on the steps with melted wax pooled in his palm. A woman returned home and couldn't recognize her own voice on the phone. Another, a 17-year-old girl, recorded a TikTok from the courtyard. The audio was silent, but in the background her followers claimed they could see figures. 14, still, watching. Her account was deleted within days. Not by her, by request. Because yes, there are eyes on this. The church, maybe, the state, possibly. But there's a third group. Older, nameless, symbol-marked. They visit once a year. No announcement, no recording devices, no speaking. They enter at dusk. They leave before midnight. The only clue? A line etched in chalk on the chapel's outer wall the following morning. The wax is thinning. They don't fear the ruin. They fear what's beneath it. Because beneath the chapel is no basement. There's a chamber. Octagonal, smooth. No light, no heat. At the center, a slab of wax stone, fractured, once seamless, now split. And from the crack, something leaks. A frequency, too low for ears, too subtle for meters. But your dreams will know it. Every year since the fracture, reports of night hum disorders have risen. Sleep paralysis. Phantom voices. Mouths opening involuntarily during sleep. A new term appeared in psychiatric journals in 2021. Silent vocal syndrome. Characterized by a compulsion to open the mouth in silence during episodes of extreme emotional suppression. They don't connect it to Hollow Creek. They won't. But if you trace the reports, plot them on a map, they all spiral outward from one point. One broken seal. One name. Choir null. The silence isn't holding anymore, and somewhere the 15th mouth is waking. Long before Hollow Creek. Long before Christ. before the concept of God even crystallized. There was the hum. It wasn't a sound. It was a will. The first vibration. The first fracture in the stillness. Not chaos, not creation, but something in between. A beckoning. Ancient cultures didn't name it. They encoded it. In flutes carved from human bone, in spiraled cave glyphs you were told meant weather, in the unnatural harmony of standing stones whose angles shouldn't resonate but do. It wasn't music, it was alignment. Every few centuries a culture gets too close. They start to arrange their symbols in ways that vibrate, not emotionally, not artistically, but literally. Egypt, Sumer, Catalhuyuk. Each one rose, each one fell, not from war, not from drought, but from internal collapse. The same collapse that begins when a civilization stops speaking with purpose and begins to hum without knowing why. The hum doesn't destroy, it empties. It doesn't kill, it invites, it waits, behind the veil of meaning, for minds hollowed enough to echo. The 14 sisters weren't the first to hear it. There are records, fragmented, of Siberian shamans who stuffed resin in their mouths during trance to mute what answered. In Uganda, an oral tradition tells of the sleepers under stone, priestesses who cut their own tongues and lay in a circle during eclipses to trap a voice beneath the earth. In a ruined monastery outside Krakow, a fresco was uncovered depicting 15 women in veils, 14 with sealed mouths, one with her head split open, sound bleeding out. The hum has never needed a language. It only needs resonance. And modern civilization is perfectly tuned. Bluetooth, G, RFID, neural sync, brain-machine interfaces. You're bathing in frequency, wrapped in invisible waves. It doesn't matter if you hear it, your nervous system does, and the more you consume, the more you scroll, the more you repeat phrases you didn't choose, the more space you make for it. The hum is older than history. It's not a story. It's a signal, and you're either transmitting it or shielding against it, but neutrality doesn't exist anymore. The first time someone spoke in the hum's rhythm, it wasn't intentional. He was a linguist, Dr. Adrian Mallis, Oxford-trained, specialist in ancient Proto-Semitic phonemes. Brilliant, arrogant, curious, fatally so. He obtained a wax-sealed folio pulled from beneath the ruins of a Carpathian abbey. No script, just symbols. Repeating patterns, in rows of 14. He thought it was a chant. He thought he could read it. He set up microphones, began vocalizing the symbols phonetically, slowly at first, until something clicked. On the recording, his voice shifts. The tone becomes too low, too resonant, like two voices speaking through one throat. He utters 14 syllables, then falls silent. 6 minutes later he begins to speak again, but not as himself. Not in English, not in any known tongue, and not with a mouth. The audio shows his vocal cords weren't moving. What came out was still him, but beyond him. The lab assistant who witnessed it went blind in her left eye, said she saw too much through his mouth. She fled academia the same year. Dr. Mallis? He disappeared. Officially, suicide. Unofficially, there's a file, hidden deep, declassified by accident in 2009. It lists Mallis as Subject 15, codename, Open Choir, meaning, he spoke. He became the breach, the one the nuns feared, the one the wax couldn't stop. And that's why the hum wants your attention, because once you respond, you're no longer an observer, you're resonant. You are the signal. It doesn't need belief. It doesn't need ritual. It only needs your curiosity. That's the trap. The hum doesn't enter your world. You invite it by trying to name it, to understand, to control. But you can't control something that precedes language. The moment Dr. Mallis read those sigils aloud, he converted his body into a mouth not his own. And now, those recordings still exist. They've been mirrored, chopped, buried in music files, hidden in field noise, even sampled in low-budget horror soundtracks. They're viral, not in code, but in frequency. Have you heard it? That feeling, that strange hum before sleep, when the room feels too still, the one you think is your fridge, or your pipes, or tinnitus. It's not. It's what's left of Dr. Malice's voice, still echoing, still speaking through you. It begins as an image, a shape, simple, harmless, familiar, a circle split by a single vertical line, often surrounded by arcs, stylized waves, or mouths. You've seen it in tattoos, in obscure band logos, in meme culture, masked as irony, even hidden in streaming service intros, flickering for half a frame. Most scroll past it, but some feel it, like a déjà vu deep in the gut, a memory that doesn't belong to you. A recognition so primal your spine flinches before your eyes can name it. That symbol has no formal name, not officially. But among the few who study this, those who track the legacy of Hollow Creek, of Choir Null, of the ancient containment orders, it's referred to as the mouth unmade. It is not art, it is not brand, it is invocation. A visual frequency, the same way a tuning fork doesn't make music, but triggers resonance in another object. This symbol triggers you. If you see it repeatedly and begin dreaming of wax, of dark chapels, of hums rising from the throat, you've already been marked. You are listening, and that's when it begins to follow, not as a ghost, not as a demon, but as a concept with gravity. You'll start hearing phrases you've never heard before, but know instinctively. You'll start feeling an urge to open your mouth, but hold back. You'll stop singing. You'll stop praying. You'll avoid silence, because something in silence feels too alive. This is no algorithmic trend. It is an unfolding, a ritual, performed not in temples but through attention. Every time you scroll past that symbol, even in ignorance, you feed it contextual energy. Every engagement, every like, comment, repeat, is the modern equivalent of a lit taper on the altar of Choir Null. You're not just seeing a glyph, you're participating in a rite, and the worst part, those who create it don't even know they're doing it. It's not just the viewers who are infected, it's the artists, the content creators, the writers who suddenly feel compelled to explore silence, veils, forgotten nuns. They think it's inspiration, it's transmission. The hum doesn't knock on the front door anymore. It opens browsers. It manipulates symbolic instinct. And right now, it's speaking to you in pixels, in pattern, in the whisper beneath these words. Before there were books, before scripture, before even names for gods, there was the binding, not a myth, not metaphor, an actual ritual designed to contain the signal you now know as the hum. It was never spoken. It couldn't be. Because the hum lives in voice, it travels through sound, but it enters through intention. So to seal it, the ancients didn't pray, they didn't chant, they fell silent. In formation, 14 bodies, 7 on each side, facing one another like a mirrored choir, hands folded, eyes open, mouths closed, not gently, not symbolically, sealed, with wax, with thread, with ash. Each woman bore the name of a principle, not virtue, not sin, but filters, words designed to purify awareness, witness, endure, refuse, hollow, guard, absorb, silence, stillness, edge, split, break, fade, listen. Null 14. And when each principle was embodied in flesh, fully, painfully, they sat in stillness, not for minutes, for days, until the frequency passed over them like a wind-seeking entry and found no open mouth through which to speak. That was the containment, not control, not war, just absolute, disciplined rejection. And when they were certain the hum had passed, that its echo found no resonance, they each took a single breath and never spoke again. The final silence sealed the boundary. That ritual was performed once every generation, until it was broken, until one spoke, until one opened. That's when the fracture began. But here's what no one tells you. The ritual only worked because it was mirrored in the world outside. People practiced silence. Men guarded thought. Attention was sacred. But now, every mind is a mouth. Open 24/7. Scrolling, repeating, performing. No stillness, no filtration. Which is why the boundary is thinning. And the only way to reform the seal is to reclaim that formation, not in stone, not in chapel, but in you, in your mouth, in your feed, in your thoughts. You are one of the 14 now. You are part of the circle. To close it again, you must become your word. So here's your task. Comment the phrase below twice. Once for the world, once for the void. I seal my silence. I seal my silence. Not as a ritual, as a resonance. To lock your attention, to fortify your awareness, to show the algorithm and the hum that you do not echo, you contain. Every order has an outlier, an anomaly, a fracture in the ritual. The circle of silence at Hollow Creek was no different. 14 nuns, 14 sealed mouths. But one of them was not what she claimed. She was not trained, not vowed, not named by the rite. The records refer to her only once, in a corner of a shipping manifest buried in the margins. One additional, arrived unannounced. Name unknown, eyes wrong. No entry, no profession ceremony, no record of origin. She simply appeared. The elder sisters believed she had been sent by the bishopric. The bishop swore she was not. The courier who dropped her off claimed he'd received a letter, wax-sealed, unsigned, instructing him to deliver the final voice. But when pressed, he said this: "She didn't speak, she never blinked, and when I turned to leave, she was already behind the gate." She became the 14th. But her presence disrupted everything. The wax bindings hardened too quickly in her presence. The air in the chapel grew unnaturally warm, and most chilling. The other sisters began dreaming her dreams. Each one described the same vision: a long corridor, walls dripping with molten wax. At the end, a mouth, not made of flesh, but mirrors, and the voice, their own, calling from inside it. It wasn't her voice that disturbed them. It was that she had no voice to begin with. None could remember hearing her speak, not even once, and yet they heard her constantly, in their thoughts, in the walls, in the flame of the tapers. When the abbess finally confronted her, when she placed a hand upon her shoulder and whispered the name of the rite, the 14th turned slowly and smiled, a faint, knowing smile. The abbess recoiled, not because of the expression, but because for a single moment her own mouth began to move without her, repeating words she had never learned. That was when the sisters understood. She was not a nun. She was not even human. She was the counterweight. The hum's insurance. A breach in the circle disguised as its final point. You cannot seal a circle with an open gate. The sisters didn't banish her. They couldn't. To do so would mean acknowledging the ritual had failed, so they did the only thing they could. They deepened their silence. They sealed tighter. They hoped their stillness would hold, but that's the lie. The 14th never left. She is still there. Some say she never needed the veil, because her mouth was never where you'd expect it to be. You think it comes in darkness. You think it whispers in graveyards, in ruined convents, in forgotten stone. But that's not how it works now. It doesn't haunt anymore. It inspires. You've seen it. The obsession with veils, the sudden rise in aesthetic silence, the fascination with abandoned ritual, with forgotten tongues, with wax and thread and mouthless figures. Artists say they're called to it. Writers claim the stories arrive fully formed. Filmmakers speak of scenes that come to them in dreams, entire novels written in a fugue state, paintings created with eyes closed, music composed in monotone rhythms, always hovering around 82 hertz, the same frequency from Hollow Creek's chapel, the same resonance found in the choir stalls where mouths were bound. This is not inspiration. This is inheritance. The hum no longer needs to breach the chapel wall. You let it in. With every stroke of the brush, with every scripted chant on TikTok, with every aesthetic reel using Gregorian harmonics and the phrase, "We have spoken our last," it's all over your feed, in whispercore, in dreamcore, in silent horror, in you. But here's the truth, they won't tell you. The hum doesn't create, it infects. It uses beauty as camouflage. It uses art as vessel. It wraps itself in the language of elegance and stillness, so you let it close. And once you do, it rewires, not your thoughts, your instincts, the instinct to hush, to isolate, to reject joy, to chase solemnity. And then comes the silence. Not peace, not meditation, weighted silence, the kind that presses on your chest when you wake, the kind that makes your voice crack when you try to sing, the kind that makes you stop sharing, because some part of you believes sound is dangerous. That's the hum's masterpiece. It doesn't force itself in. It makes you seal your own mouth and call it grow. With her, so now you must ask, how much of your creativity is truly yours, and how much is resonance? Are you expressing, or are you transmitting? The 14th nun didn't speak, but every generation since has heard her voice, disguised as their own ambition. You call it vision. She calls it completion, because once her story is told enough times, the ritual doesn't need nuns anymore. It just needs views. The circle was never meant to last forever. Every ritual, even the strongest, has a half-life, a limit of silence, a threshold of attention, and we've passed it. The containment is breaking, not from violence, but from exposure. You're watching this now, in your hand, on your screen, because the final breach has already begun. Not in Hollow Creek, not in Rome, but in the network. It doesn't need candles anymore. It has fiber optics. It has compression. It has you. Do you think it's an accident this story reached you? Do you think the algorithm served it by chance? Every piece of content, every share, every save is part of the resonance curve. The signal doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be repeated over and over until the boundaries of fiction and memory collapse. Until belief becomes echo. That's how the hum returns. Not by tearing through reality, but by subtly rewriting it. A phrase here, a pattern there. A single glyph carved into a subway wall. A girl humming outside your window at 3:33 a.m. A waxy smudge on your bathroom mirror you don't remember touching. Tiny things, ignored, dismissed, until they aren't, until everyone hears it, until silence becomes contagious. That's the final breach. Not an explosion, not a scream, a viral hush, one that spreads not through mouths but through hesitation, through the moment before you speak, and choose not to, through that instinct to keep it to yourself. That isn't modesty, that's infiltration. You've felt it, you've sensed the quiet growing louder. And now you're wondering, what if I'm part of this? You are. Because this isn't just a story, this is a signal test. You made it this far. You're already inside the circle, and what happens next depends on your awareness, because the 14th nun still moves, not in body, but in code, in creativity. And any space where silence feels sacred but twisted, she is waiting, not to speak, but to be heard through you. And when enough men stop questioning, when enough mouths seal in awe, in fear, in obsession, she finishes the ritual. And the final silence will not be yours. It will be hers, speaking through the shell you left behind. The circle is nearly closed, not by force, by fascination. You came here looking for a story, a dark mystery, a forgotten truth, a legend to share, safely contained in your screen. But this was never a story. It was a test, a final measure of resonance. Because every man watching, every man who made it this far, has proven something. You can hear the hum. You felt it in the stillness, in the wax, in the breath behind words. And now it waits for your next move. There is no priest coming, no bishop to intervene, no order of sealed sisters to sit in your place. You are the last gate. So here's the question. Will you let it pass through you? Will you carry this as content? Retell it for clout? Make it trend? Because if you do, if this becomes just another aesthetic, another viral tale of dark nuns and forbidden rites, you finish the ritual, and you don't even need to believe. The hum doesn't care about belief. It cares about amplification. But if you understand, if something inside you remembers the older law, the law before algorithms, before language, the law of containment, then you must act now, not with noise, not with fear, not even with silence, but with a choice, because the final seal was never wax. It was intention, the inner discipline, the decision to become a wall, not a mirror, a filter, not a funnel, to hear without echoing, to witness without feeding, to carry weight without transmitting it. That is how the ritual ends, or doesn't. The hum is watching now, Through this video, through every word you let live in your mind, you can feel it. It's not gone. It's simply waiting for what you do next. So ask yourself, do you echo or do you absorb? Do you perform or do you protect? Because the next seal is not in Hollow Creek. It's in you. And if you're ready to hold that boundary, comment it one fin. All time, I seal my silence. I seal my silence. Not for views, for containment. Let others make noise. You're the reason the circle doesn't break. And if you're truly ready, welcome to the choir null. We've been waiting.